not just in this church, but individually for every single person. And it is Palm Sunday, and that's the first passage that I'm going to read this morning. It's in John 12. If you guys want to open up there. If not, you can look it up on your phone, I'm sure. And if not, it'll be right there. I'm going to read it real quick, and this is the triumphant entry of Jesus. And this is what it says, John 12, verse 12. The next day, a great crowd had come to the festival. For the festival, heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." At first, his disciples did not understand all of this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had to be done, or had been written and about, and all these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed that sign, went out to meet him. And the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him," being Jesus. Now, I don't know if my slides are working either, so this is going to be a beautiful moment for you to look down at a piece of paper that's in front of you that says, "Who is God to you?" I apologize. Who is God to you? Now, this passage of scriptures is written in John, and it's this beautiful understanding. And I took the perspective of there's four types of people that are in the crowd at this moment watching Jesus come in. And there's the Pharisees, and if we identify with, you're going to identify with one of these, and we're probably going to identify with all four of these at some point in our lives. Because we all have been this third party that I'll talk about. But the Pharisees are the first ones that I want to talk about. They're the last ones that are mentioned in this passage. And these people are religious leaders of the day, and what has happened is they look at Jesus and they see someone who is causing trouble in their lives, in their faith walk. And they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, "No, this guy is claiming that he's the Messiah, and he's wrong, and he's messing everything up. We have a church. We're going from point A to point B, and he is messing all these things up." And then there's the palm holders. These are the people who get excited about God when the majority is excited about him. And I think we all kind of understand this. We call it like a mob mentality, and it used to just be like an actual mob mentality, right? Like you could, like, there would be a mob. Like if you guys saw Philadelphia after they won, that's a mob mentality. They're like so excited they want to destroy things. You're like, wow, that's weird. I never had that thought or feeling before, but it's the excitement of getting in a group. But now we have this thing called the internet, and there's mob mentality on there because you can do things and say things without actually showing your identity or being face to face with someone. And that's kind of what these palm holders are. They're these people who get excited about Jesus because they've heard about what he's done, and they're excited, and they come and they bring these branches like, wow, this guy is something special. And then there's the disciples. These are imperfect followers who believe just as long as it makes sense to them. I think most of us, if we call ourselves believers, can identify with that at some point. I enjoy believing in God, and I flourish believing in God when it makes sense to me, and when it doesn't, it's difficult. There's this misunderstanding that we have to know what God is doing all of the time in order to believe, and that's wrong. And that's what we're talking about today. And then there's this third party that these people are crazy. So if you can imagine, they're living in a Roman world, and these Jewish people who are the outsiders that have been brought into their society, into their education, into their understanding and thought and philosophy, and they believed in many different gods. And then they're brought in, and you're in a city where Romans are coming in, and they're the vast majority at this point, and the Jewish people are looking at this Jesus who's coming into town, sitting on a donkey, who he's stolen the donkey, which is kind of crazy. But that's all prophecy from the Old Testament that was going to happen, that was fulfilled at that day. And it says the disciples didn't understand it. If you can imagine with me, there's these people looking on the outside, like in their homes, and they're looking out on the street, and they're seeing these people waving these branches, and they're welcoming what would be like a king. And they're excited, and they're screaming, they're yelling, and they're laying down branches before Jesus. And then there's the disciples who are walking alongside. They're like, why doesn't everybody know about this guy? Like, we've seen all these amazing things. We understand. The Pharisees are sitting even further back going, this is the problem we were talking about. This is what we were worried about. He's messing up everything. These people shouldn't be doing what they're doing. They shouldn't be following Jesus. They need to stop this. So then I went on to, do you remember what he's done? And these two first questions are kind of just the base of what we're going to be talking about today, because what we're talking about is trust. Do you remember what Jesus has done? What God has done? And I wrote down, if it's in the notes, I think it is. If not, then you guys are in for a ride today. The Pharisees. The Pharisees, again, are teachers and rulers of the law of Moses. They were like pastors, kind of, and they help people along. Their job was to help people along, make sense of what was going on. And the Pharisees had seen and heard of the things that Jesus was doing, but they were convinced that it was not God doing it. They were absolutely convinced. They saw Lazarus rise from the dead and come out. And if you can imagine the smell and awfulness of Lazarus' body at the moment. And they'd seen people who had never been able to walk, ever. And Jesus says, get up and go. They saw those types of things. And what surprised me all the time, I've told you guys this before, about the stories of like Jesus healing people, is like people who have never walked, who have no muscle mass in their legs, get up and they walk. You know how long it took you to learn how to walk? I have 3 children. It has all taken them at least 9 months. Jesus literally looks at these people and he says, get up and walk. And they get up and they walk and they skip and they run and they jump and they run away. And the Pharisees see those things and they're like, it's not God. This guy's Satan. Like that's truly what they believed in Jesus. Is like, how can the good and the good come together and then it be bad? No, that doesn't even make sense. Like if it was bad, doing bad things, that would make sense. But if bad things are happening in good ways, then that doesn't make any sense. Like the good kind of people can't do the bad things, and the bad people, it's like it doesn't make any sense. Jesus is like, what are you talking about? And then there's these palm holders, and they've heard about the great things. It says that they had heard about Jesus raising Lazarus, and they all came running. They're like, man, if that guy's here, I want to be next to him. They had heard all these things. And then there were the disciples. And the disciples, they had seen it happen. They watched it happen and they believed that it was God. And so we're going to identify somewhere, if I'm not under the assumption that everyone believes that Scripture is perfect, but in this church that's what we believe. We believe that Scripture is fully inspired by God. And so if you don't believe that, then imagine with me, because it's not going to make sense unless you believe this. So imagine with me that Scripture is fully inspired by God and that it is perfect. So once we know who God is to us and what role He plays in our life, and then we understand what has He done in our lives, then we can start moving on. And I want to share some stories with you just real quick about what God has done in my life and Jamie's life just since we've been married. And this is how, when people ask me, how do you know God is real? You're young, you have kids, you're not wealthy, but you're doing okay. how do you believe in God? Like, how do you trust Him to take care of you? Like, how is that something that you like? If you had a really good job that paid well, I could see you just being like, yeah, like God's taking care of you, dude. And I'm like, I'm a pastor. I always tell people, like, my retirement is death. So I'll see you up there. It's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. Can't wait. For all of you teachers and people who have those like sweet retirement, God bless you. I love you. And then Campaign's like, yes, this year. But this is kind of the things that have happened in our life. When Jamie and I when we got married, we threw our entire wedding, like outfits, food, honeymoon, everything was within an $1,800 budget. So it was awesome. We had biggest, loudest, craziest wedding. No, our wedding was like really, it was like Jamie's dress came in a box and it was wrapped up like this. It was from China, and it had been air packed and then rolled, and it came from China. And we were like, man, hopefully this looks good. It looked good on eBay. And I remember after we got married, Jamie was in her master's program, and so we were taking out student loans so that she could get through her master's program, and she was going to Liberty, which was like, it was online, but she had to go for intensive classes out to Virginia. And so we're like looking at it, and I made an amazing salary. And at my first church, being an associate pastor, and after our student loan debt that we were paying, after rent, we ended up taking in, after all of that, $300 a month to pay for groceries and to pay for gas, pay for the electric bill, and all those things. And it was scary because we were like, man, life is expensive, and cars are expensive because we didn't have nice cars. Like, I had this sweet Volvo S60 that, like, I kid you not, my seat was reclined all the way back because it was a motorized one, and the motor broke. And so it was like this. So like, I had to drive like this, and I was like, if I get a crash, I'm dead. Like, whiplash will take me out like that. But God was always there providing for us. And I remember there was a specific month where Jamie and I were looking at it, and we're like, there's still a week left, and the fridge is empty. And we literally had like nothing to eat. And I didn't want to go to like the pastor and be like, hey, like, we have no food. What can you do for me? Which I probably should have, because that's what the church is here for. And if you need that, we have a ministry here for that. But I remember we had like, we literally had $50 left, and we had no food. And we're like, okay, we're going to go, because we knew that like the next month was going to be just as lean. We're like, okay, this $50 has got to stretch for like 3 weeks, because if it doesn't stretch 3 weeks, then we're gonna be at like $10 at the last week next month. And so we went to the grocery store, and we were like, man, we have one credit card. Maybe we could buy some on credit. And so we started filling our basket. We were really intentional about all the things, and it was after Sunday, because that's when we went to the store. We lived in the ghetto, so it's kind of scary to go outside. I'm not kidding you. Like, we would only go shopping on Sundays because we're like, people won't shoot us on Sunday. And we went, and we got to the grocery store, and we filled our basket up with like just the essentials, and we were trying to like not spend all the money because there's no gas in my car, no gas in her car. We had no money coming in, and all of a sudden this lady from our church walks up with her husband, and she's like, hey guys, how you doing? We're like, great, and like, we're doing awesome, so good. God is blessing us. But we had this faith in God that was like really weird. We'd spend our nights praying and believing that God was going to do something in our lives. And Penny was like, hey, we're just grabbing a loaf of bread. Can we pay for your food too? And we're like, I should have put more in. Should have had more faith in God. And then, a couple weeks later, we were at a youth group, and there's this one girl who I had a really difficult time with, and her boyfriend was in a gang and all this stuff. And one week we were having youth group, and I set my iPod up and we were playing music in the youth group. We went to the gym with all the kids. We were playing a game, and I come back and the music has stopped. I'm like, what in the world? And my iPod is gone. And I'm like, oh wow, that stinks. Like that was all of our technology in our youth group was my iPod. And I was like, oh man, that's such a bummer. And 3 months went by, I was like, every week I was like, hey, if you guys see an iPod lying around, that's kind of like all of our music and everything, so let me know. And 3 months went by, and I was like, man, God's going to turn this into a blessing somewhere. Like, at first I was angry. I was like, oh, a kid came in here and stole out of a church. Come on. And 3 months went by, and all of a sudden this girl came up to me, and she's like, Devin, I have something to tell you. Okay, and this girl, her and I, like, we butted heads, like, the whole time. My mom was like, you really got to get a hold of this girl. She doesn't follow God, and she's got all this stuff going on. Her boyfriend's part of a gang. She's trying to get into this gang, and she just wants to be, she always told me, like, I just want to be a part of the streets, and she's like, I just want to be a part of a gang, and I just want to have that type of community, and I was telling her, God has a better plan for your life. So she comes to me one Wednesday, she's like, I have to tell you something. She's like, I just broke up with my boyfriend. I was like, thank God, that was stupid. And she was like, but I also have to tell you that I called him up and I told him that you were me out of the room, and he stole the iPod, and he stole some other things too that were missing in the room, and we went and sold those, and she's like, I just really want to say I'm sorry. And there was a breakthrough, and God took these things that we kind of trusted in, and then we moved to a new church, and we were again living on an amazing salary of just mine, and it was awesome. We lived in an apartment with 4 windows. We called it the dungeon, and the cabinets were brown, not like a nice like oak like brown, but it was like they painted them brown. They were like, this looks good. They ran out of black, for the cabinets. But we're relying on God to do these things. I'm like, man, like God, it's coming really tight at the end of the month. Like we're doing our best, and we get a check in the mail from our tax return, and then at that point we had like $0 in our account. There was like 2 weeks left. We're like, what is God going to do? We have a baby. Like, what is happening? And we get this check in the mail. I'm like, God, you are so good. And then Jamie was working, and there was somebody at our church who knew the superintendent. She hadn't gotten a job as a counselor yet at a school. And we're like, how is she going to break through this wall? And this guy at our church is like, oh, I know the superintendent. You want me to like just drop a name? And she was like, I don't know. And I was like, yes, we do. We want you to just say her name in a random conversation. She's like, no, we're having dinner with him tonight. Let me just mention her name. And the next day, her boss came up and was like, oh yeah, I was talking to the superintendent, and he was saying that he knew somebody who knew you. And then like a month later, she got a job at school. And we're like, God, you are doing some amazing things, and these are like these things that are in our past, that are part of Jamie and I's story, and for you to understand, like you can't take my stories and apply them to your life. You have your own stories, and I'm telling you these stories because these are my own experiences. That we were looking for a house because we were like, we don't want to live in this place. We couldn't afford to rent, and so my parents helped us out. We were able to buy a home, and it was just such this like huge blessing. And even when it looked like it was going to be this huge money pit at the end, we were like, oh man, that was a terrible choice. What are we doing? God was like, here's a blessing. And we're like, what in the world? God's like, you come in at all these moments, and even this month we were looking at it, we're like, man, it looks pretty lean because we're trying to pay off all our student debt before our children are 50. And so we're putting ourselves on this budget. We're like, oh man, there's only a little bit amount of money in our bank account right now. And yesterday I got a check in the mail from something that I did a year ago that I was not expecting at all. And I'm like, God, you're constantly reminding me of things that you've done. The ways that you've blessed me. And these aren't like things that are just reserved for pastors or for people that are constantly praying for them, because I am constantly praying for them. But it comes from trust. So do you trust what God is doing in your own life? we don't have the thing. So if you have it on here, you can look, and it's Hustler DIYer. And I realize I'm not of a generation that understands what Hustler is, and somebody pointed that out to me, I'm sorry. Hustler meaning like you hustle all the time. Like you are on your grind every day. You're Ubering, you're lifting, you're out there like waiting tables while you're teaching a class. You know, you're also doing pottery as a side job. But if you're that type of person in your faith walk where God is like, here's what we're going to do, and you're like, no. God, I can do it. I'm a DIY. Like, I can do it myself. Like, I am going to go ahead of you, God, and I'm going to start doing all these things. And God's like, why? When I can do them for you. You and I, we work and make things happen with a limited amount of time, with a limited amount of talent, with a limited amount of strength, influence, limited amount of willpower. And we live inside this context of time and money. And then I look at the things that God has done in my own life. And I think about how God works outside of time, outside of my understanding, outside of my work ethic. Penny wasn't there on accident on Sunday. She didn't have it put on her heart to help us just by chance. They ran out of bread on Wednesday, and they were like, man, we really need to get some bread. And then on Sunday, they're like, all right, we're right next to her, let's go get some bread. And then they saw us, and they're like, hey, maybe they need to be blessed today. God works outside of time. Does that make sense to you? Like, things that you don't have any control over. God's like, why would you do it yourself if you can rely on me for things? You need to trust in me. Some of us are doubters. We believe that God isn't doing anything. How many of you have ever been there? I'm going to raise 2 hands. God's not doing anything right now. God, you're ignoring me. Or God, are you even there? Are you real? I've had those moments in my life many times where I'm like, man, God, I don't know. This is getting too much, too soon, too quick, too heavy. I can't do it. Are you really taking care of me? We're doubters. How about the wanderers? Okay. When I was a kid, I was about 5 years old. I grew up in a small town called Bishop, California. It's the mule capital of the world. We have the longest unmotorized parade in the world. Pulled only by donkeys and horses and mules. So it's a pretty cool town. And that's a preface because the rodeo was in town, which is a huge deal. And need some water for this one. I had to go to the restroom. My mom was with my little sister, who was a baby at the time. My dad was like, all right, let's go, boys. So we took me and my older brother to the restroom, which was on the other side of the arena. The way that it was set up was there's 2 entrances, like just a brick wall, and then it goes in. So I went to the restroom. My dad was like, I'm going to be right here when you come out. I'm going to be right here when you come out. And I was like, got it. So then I went to the bathroom, and I was like, went out the opposite way because I'm an awesome kid. And I looked around, and I was like, where in the world is my dad and brother? And I just looked around, and I was like, well, I guess they're not here. And I left, and I just walked away, and I like walked back like towards our seats, which was on the other side of the arena. But I was like, I didn't want to miss the rodeo, so I walked up like one of the grandstands so I could like walk along and see what was going on. Like a little 5-year-old kid just walking, doing his thing. And then I got back to my seat finally because I was wandering, just aimlessly wandering. And I get back to my seat and my mom isn't there. And I'm like, whoa, my brother and dad aren't there. And I'm like, uh-oh. So then I get scared and I start, walking through all these grandstands because there's 3 sets of them. I go through ours, can't find them. I'm not telling anyone. Like I'm trying not to act scared so no one asks me because I'm an introvert. So I'm like, please don't come up and I'm fine, trust me. And then I walk through the next grandstands and I walk through the big grandstands. My parents aren't there and I'm like, I guess I'm walking home, and it's a small town, so it's not like, it'd be a huge deal if you saw 5-year-old walking home, because that's weird. But it would have been, it had always crossed my mind. I used to tell my teachers, I'm just going to walk home today, and they're like, no, Mom probably wants you there. So, but I'm leaving the arena, and I'm getting scared, because I'm like, man, that's scary, it's dark out there. Like, oh man, like, what's going to happen? And I go out and I see my mom crying at the gate, and then the police have like pulled up their cars. And that's when you know that you're in trouble as a kid. You're like, no! The police are here to arrest me for walking away. But I'll never forget, I walked up with my dad and I hugged him. I was like, Dad, where'd you go? He was like, I was right here. The entire time. I was right here. You walked away. And you can look at your own faith walk and say, God, where were you? And he's like, I was waiting. I was building. I was doing all of these things. And you just, oh yeah, you walked away from me. And then when you find your way back, you're like, God, what were you doing? How could you do that? He's like, I was right here the whole time. And then you're a faithful, trusting believer. That's about, unfortunately, 2 to 4% of the time. That's where you fall into the category of a faithful, trusting believer. I want to talk to you guys real quick about Nicodemus. It's in John 3, verses 10 through 15. I'm going to read it to you guys. John 3, verse 10 through 15. Our Israel's teacher. Now, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He's part of the Sanhedrin. And what the Sanhedrin are, they are a group of judges, or a group of rabbis who judge over a city in a land. And so Nicodemus is a great leader of his time, and Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. Now, John plays this narrative, this like great storytelling ability in the book of John, where he plays with light and dark. Light is good, dark is bad. Nicodemus comes at night. Why? Because Nicodemus is afraid that the rest of the Sanhedrin will see him and believe that he is also following Jesus. And if he is also following Jesus, then he needs to be dealt with just like they're going to deal with Jesus. So he's scared. So he comes to Jesus at night and he addresses him as Rabbi, which is not technically what Jesus was to anyone else. He didn't have the title of rabbi, which Nicodemus did. And he asks him, he's like, what am I supposed to do with this knowledge of you? And he says, here's what you do. And Jesus kind of toys with him a little bit at this point. He's like, here's what you do. You have to be born again. And he's like, what? How can a grown man be born again? Like, you can't be put back in the womb. And he's like, okay, you have to be born of light and of water, spirit and water. And he's like, what are you talking about? What are you saying to me? You can't be born again. You can't be born in water even after you've been born. Like, what are you speaking of? And Jesus says this, you are Israel's teacher, said Jesus, and you do not understand these things? Very truly, I tell you, we speak of what we know, and we testify to him and the disciples to what we have seen, but still you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you about earthly things, and you do not believe. And this word believe is translated, it was translated as believe, but it also is translated as trust in or faith in. And so he says, you don't have trust in me, you don't have faith in me about these things. And he says, so I have spoken these earthly things to you, and you do not believe, you do not trust, you do not have faith. How then can you have faith or believe in when I speak of heavenly things? If you can't understand what's going on here, how can I trust you with what's there? You don't get it. No one has ever gone into heaven except for the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man, named Jesus. He's talking about himself. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up and exalted, that everyone who believes may have eternal life. And this is a part of that passage, John 3:16, and we stopped it right before then. But Jesus is looking at him and he's like, how can you be trusted with the things that are here and now, the miracles that I'm doing in your life? You don't even see them. How can I trust you with this? If you can't believe in this, then I can't trust you with that. And Nicodemus is such a crazy story because Nicodemus comes up later in Scripture when they're talking when the Sanhedrin decides that they're going to murder Jesus. And Nicodemus says, no, you can't just kill him. you at least have to put him on trial. You at least have to give him a chance to explain himself. And Nicodemus has this like somewhat of a faith, but he's coming in from this darkness. How many of you have ever been in the darkness trying to tiptoe your way into the light, just being like, I don't want anybody to know that I'm going to rely on trust and faith in God, but I'm going to put myself out there in my private life. And Jesus is like, you have to step into the light if you want to receive what's coming. And Nicodemus' story doesn't end here. It doesn't end after he talks to Sanhedrin. What's beautiful about Nicodemus' story in John, and I never read it, and I encourage you to go read the Easter story this week as we come on Easter this next week. But after Jesus dies, it says that when the disciples have left, because it didn't make sense to them. We already talked about it. It only was good when it made sense. But after Jesus dies and it doesn't make sense anymore, Nicodemus, the one who came in darkness, came in the light of day, preparing 100 pounds of spices to prepare Jesus' body in front of everyone. It's easy to stand with God when the miracles are happening here and now. It's difficult when we live in the death of Jesus. When we live in those moments of God is not working here and now. God doesn't understand what's happening here and now. We have to be like Nicodemus, where we ask the questions that we need to know. And then when the time comes, you say, everybody else is gone, everybody else has abandoned Jesus, because now it's just a body lying there, suffering. And he takes Jesus, he puts him in the tomb, he prepares his body, and he does it in front of everyone. There's one last point that's not in your notes, and I encourage you to write it in. Live in the light of knowing God is, capital is, doing something. Our lack of belief sometimes is often the only thing that keeps us from experiencing God's glory. And I'm going to say it again because it's worth saying again. Our lack of belief is often the only thing keeping us experiencing what God is doing. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we're living in darkness. We're living on the side saying, I don't trust what God is doing. I don't see what God is doing. And because of that, we've put blinders to what God is actually doing here and now, because God is working in each and every one of your lives. And it's up to you to start viewing these things differently. And so I wrote this, your trust in God may not change the circumstance, but that trust in God changes your experience of everything. Your trust in God may not change the circumstance, but that trust in God changes how you experience everything. And I think of it this way. If you have been living and you have gotten a diagnosis that you were not expecting and that the end looks near, regardless of the results, God is in it with you. When you lose that job that you rely on to pay the bills, when you get evicted from that place, when your family member dies, when things go tragically wrong in your life, your perspective has to be on God. Why? Because whether it turns out good and a miracle happens and you get to rejoice in that, you also get to rejoice in the fact that even if it goes wrong, God is still working and moving through it. Your perspective changes. When I view death, sometimes I think it's the end. But when I view it in the light of Jesus, it's the beginning of everything. The moment that Jesus stepped or sat on that donkey, it was the beginning of the end, but the beginning of everything. Jesus' life was beautiful and wonderful, but when we start looking at our own lives through the lens of Jesus, we're going to start seeing the bad things as good things. And when we see the good things, they're amazing things. Why? Because if I believe that God can provide for my family, it doesn't have to come from me. When somebody brings us a meal or someone does something for you or the rent is randomly paid by somebody doing something as a blessing to you, you don't say, wow, I got lucky. You say, God is working and God is moving. And all we have to do is trust. God is always at work in our lives, even when we don't feel Him or hear Him. And it's this trust. And next week is Easter, and we're celebrating Monday, Thursday, which is it's just like Good Friday. We call it good, but it's sad. But it had to happen. And for the disciples, I think, their trust wavered. When Jesus was arrested, and they're like, this is it. But something happened when the Holy Spirit came upon them on the day of Pentecost. And we also receive the same Spirit. We say, God is here, He is living, and we will trust in Him in everything that He does. And I encourage you, start living in that trust this week. Start thinking about the things that God is doing here and now. And I encourage you, when we close in the service, I want you to go back to that board that says what God is doing. And I want you to write down something that God is doing in your life. Something that God is doing that you're believing Him and trusting Him for, and write it down as a declaration that we have faith in Him. Because if we can't be trusted with the here and now, how are we going to be trusted with the resurrection? There has to be responsibility. And Jamie and I, my mom and my sister, we got this theological discussion last night. Man, what do all these things mean? Can God change our circumstance and all this stuff? And it really doesn't matter whether or not God changes our circumstance. And that's what we came to the conclusion of. It does not matter if the circumstances change. The only thing that matters is that our trust in God changes the way we see things. Losing a job, God's in it. Let's go. Death of a parent or sibling, God's with me. Let's move on. We can do this. Being evicted, God is going to bless me with a great place. Fridge dies, car dies. We've all been there. AC dies on the hottest day of summer. God's going to bless you somehow, some way. It might not be with money, it might not be with things, but it could be a relationship that He forms out of it.